In this unit, as you know, we've been talking about how we can get energy from electron transfer. And in this particular lecture, we're going to talk about fuel cells. We're going to figure out how is a fuel cell similar and different to what we call a battery, and how they work in general. Okay, so a fuel cell is also a galvanic cell. Remember, the galvanic cell is an electrochemical cell in which the oxidation and reduction reaction is spontaneous. And so just by putting the reactants together, you can run a spontaneous reaction and harvest the energy when you separate the two half reactions. So a fuel cell is another type of galvanic cell. The differences with a fuel cell is that you are actually converting chemical energy of a fuel without burning the fuel. Remember, the combustion reactions are also a type of redox reactions. We can see the electrons are transferred in combustion reactions. So these types of fuel cells are sometimes called flow batteries, because rather than having a fixed quantity of reactants, such that the battery would run out of reactants, or the battery would need to be recharged to reformulate the reactants. In this case, the reactants, the fuel, and some sort of oxidizer, normally oxygen, is continually pumped into the fuel cell. Okay, and the most common fuel used in fuel cells is hydrogen, but you'll also see methane and methanol used as the fuel for fuel cells as well. Okay, so let's see exactly what this looks like. Here is a schematic diagram of a fuel cell. Okay, so let's look first at this over here. Let's look first at what we can see is something that we would be able to compare to the typical galvanic cell. And that is, just like a galvanic cell, there's an anode and a cathode. And at the anode is going to be the site of oxidation, and the cathode is going to be the site of reduction. And again, we keep the anode physically separated from the cathode compartment, and the electrons are shuttled through an external wire, so we can get work out of the flowing electrons in the form of electricity. And so in this case, what we see is the hydrogen is flowing in on the anode side, and oxygen is flowing in on the cathode side. And so the anode and the cathode are separated by a membrane. In this case, it's called a proton exchange membrane, or PEM. And a lot of times as you go on and start reading about the fuel cell technology, you'll see that the PEM type of fuel cell is the most common type of fuel cell. It's also sometimes called a polymer electrolyte membrane. Okay, polymer electrolyte membrane. Okay, which also happens to be PEM. All right, so same abbreviation. The polymer electrolyte membrane is a place for proton exchange to occur, and a polymer is a more modern type of membrane. The polymer membrane is a more modern type of membrane used in these fuel cells. But you'll see the word electrolyte and proton exchange. That's telling you that this is the place where we would be analogous to the salt bridge in the galvanic cells that we've been looking at before. Okay, so the hydrogen is flowing in, and then the excess hydrogen is flowing out. Oxygen is flowing in, excess oxygen, and the product of the oxidation reduction reaction is flowing out. Okay, so that's why it's called a flow cell. So we're continually flowing the fuel through the membrane. At the anode, we have oxidation occurring, then the electrons are shuttled around to the cathode compartment where reduction is occurring. Okay, and so at the anode, the reaction that's occurring is hydrogen to release the electrons and give the hydrogen ion, and then in the cathode, the hydrogen ion has made its way across the membrane, and it's going to meet up with the oxygen that's flowing in on that side to produce the product water. Okay, so here's this little section of the fuel cell blown up. You can see the hydrogen molecule right here is coming in. At the surface of the anode, because there is a push for the electrons to be pushed off, because there's a pull for the electrons to be put onto the oxygen and the hydrogen to form the water. So it's this push-pull action going again. So at this site, the hydrogen is giving up its electrons, becoming the proton, which is H+. The proton itself then, stripped of its electrons, the electrons are going through the external circuit. The proton is moving across this membrane, and it's getting picked up by the oxygen right here to form water. Okay, so this is how we separate. The net reaction, of course, is hydrogen plus oxygen gives water. The net reaction is hydrogen plus 1/2 oxygen gives water. Okay, so that's the net reaction, separated into 2 half reactions. All right, so we can see the electrons are going to be going around this external circuit, and that's where we get the electricity from.